Jay's Custom Creations is sponsored by Bits and Bits. Use the code JBates to save 10% off your next router bit or CNC bit purchase at bitsbits.com. Recently, my wife asked me if I could make a charcuterie board or a serving tray of some kind to fulfill one of her orders, and absolutely I can do that, but it makes much more sense to make a bunch of them if at all possible. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just making a bunch of blanks that my wife can use for engraving. The material of choice I'm using here is 8/4 poplar because I've got it on a pretty decent deal. I don't recall exactly what I paid, but I think it was around $2 a board foot, which in my area is not bad for 8/4 poplar. Got a bunch of this on hand, so might as well cut it up. Now, poplar versus some other desirable wood like walnut or something like that, what I've noticed is the majority of the people who come into the shop and see my wife's work, or the majority of her local customers, don't care as much about the species as much as they do about the size. Like a larger chunk of wood just has a greater appreciation value, locally anyway, than a smaller chunk of a more desirable species, if that makes sense. So in the beginning of all of this, it's just a bunch of mundane milling. We're just milling a bunch of stuff. I think I picked 4 or 5 boards off my lumber rack, so it wasn't a tremendous amount, but it was a decent enough amount to keep me busy. And speaking of keeping busy, it's really fun, being completely selfish here, really fun to have my family here in the shop with me as I'm working. I chose to not narrate this video in person, but rather after the fact, simply so they could be in the shop with me. And it's really cool. Watching a lot of little hidden gems that my daughter gave the camera while I was not really paying attention and doing my work. As I'm editing this, I'm finding all that, and it's really cool. Having my family in the shop with me while we're all working and being productive, well, my 5-year-old is being a 5-year-old most of the time, it's just so much fun, and I really enjoy this time. Here's something that I wish all tool manufacturers would pick up on, and that is adding a lower body activated off switch. So in this case, this jointer has an entire length button on the bottom that you can touch with your foot to turn off the jointer. It's just simple and it's brilliant. Here's something else that's just very simple and brilliant. Use an extra board in and out on your planer to accept the snipe, right? So this is what I call a snipe board. It goes in first before any of my pieces, and this particular batch of material was long enough that way I could continuously feed and pull without having any gap in cutting. And that allows me to use this small board in front of the first board, and then also once again in the back of the last board. And what that does is it puts the snipe on this particular board and not all of my work pieces. One more source of some charcuterie board stock is this particular glue up that I've had around my shop for quite a while. This was actually the center section of a somewhat failed bandsaw box idea. I glued it up to make a bandsaw box, but then ended up changing my mind halfway through it, so it's just this empty core, the center core for that particular project. So for this, it's basically a large lamination cutting board, essentially. So I'm going to slice off a bunch of layers that can be used individually as charcuterie boards or serving trays, whatever you want to call them. And this is just a good use of this stock, something that I've just been, like I said, kicking around the shop for a while. So I jointed and squared up 3 adjacent faces. That'll give me one face to reference off of the bandsaw table, and then the 2 flat faces reference off the bandsaw fence. So that way I can make 2 cuts, one on either side, to remove 2 panels, go back to the jointer, square up those 2 adjacent faces once again, and then repeat the process. And that way I always have one jointed face up against the fence for all of the bandsaw cuts. Then I can take them to the planer and then plane the opposite face flat and parallel. This is pretty cool. I have a marketing relationship with Bits and Bits, as you already know, and sometimes they get to send me some stuff that no one else has access to yet. So as of right now, when I'm recording this, I don't know if this particular bit is for sale on a website, and I don't know if I'm actually supposed to be talking about it, but here we go. I'm testing out this new compression bit that they have. Compression chip breaker, that's what it is, compression chip breaker. putting it through some paces here. This is, now keep in mind I don't have a vac table, and I'm trying to cut these as large as I possibly can, so I don't really have much top-down work holding. So I'm using a stick here and there to hold the slab down as it cuts through all but 1/2 of an inch of material. That 1/2 of an inch I'll clean up in just a minute. But here, this is real time at 450 inches per minute, 3/8 of an inch diameter bit, 3/8 of an inch depth per pass, and it's just balling through there. It's just flying. So this is really cool to experiment and test some of this stuff out. What I noticed is on some of this poplar on the sapwood areas, it was getting a little bit of tear out. The rest of the area was pretty good, but the sapwood caused all kinds of tear out. So I backed it down to, I think it was 300 inches per minute for the rest of these. Now my strategy here was to have the, of course the top and bottom are jointed and flat and parallel, and then I have one reference straight edge up against the dogs, which is the left side or the operator side of the CNC machine. And then whatever width each board was, I didn't worry about that because I was trying to get maximum width on all of these cuts. But what this allows me to do is gang up as many of the same shape as possible on each one of these boards, and then I can take them over to my router table and use a flush trim bit to free them all from the original slab. Speaking of flush trim router bits, this is a 1/4 inch diameter flush trim bit with a 1/4 inch diameter bushing on top, so you can get into some really tight spaces with it. So this fit obviously good in the 3/8 of an inch kerf that the CNC machine left. But this is also an upcut spiral bit, and if it's in a router table, that upcut direction is actually pointing down or pulling the material down to the table, which is what you kind of want at a router table, so you're not going to lift the material accidentally. I had to play around with the insert rings that come with this router lift to find the right size. I wanted a larger diameter opening so that I could get more dust collection, more suction, which also helps keep the material to the table surface. But I think I had to switch it out to some smaller diameter openings or rings because some of the pieces ended up getting wedged down in there and causing me to start and stop constantly, which was really, really annoying. After the router table, I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup here. Not a tremendous amount. Just get the major areas that I can get with this belt sander. I'm not going to go crazy and get every little detail just yet. Mainly because after the engraving process, I've got to sand it anyway. Or my wife does actually now, which is great. We've got to sand them after the engraving process anyway, so I'm not going to go too crazy with making them perfect at this stage. Back to the router table for another router bit. This is, I believe, about a 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit more than that, radius roundover bit. I forget the exact diameter. But one thing that I like to do when setting the height of my roundover bits is just use a flat straight edge on the insert plate itself, and when that flat straight edge no longer touches the little wing of the roundover, well, then you know that it's at the appropriate height. Also, I noticed while recording this that my insert plates are not exactly flush with the actual plate itself of the router lift, so that needs to be adjusted. All of the edges that I can get with the roundover bit get some roundover bit action, and at this point, we're basically just moving one stack through the machine to another stack. Stacking over here, then moving the stack over here, then moving the stack over here, back and forth. It's just mini production work, which is just okay. I didn't put all of the pieces on the CNC machine though, because a lot of these had some knots that are kind of difficult to work around on the CNC machine when I'm trying to batch these out anyway. So for the CNC, I used the best of the best that I had of this batch, and then everything else that had knots, I could cut around on the miter saw and just accept these as rectangular blanks rather than shaped boards. After the miter saw, I can go to the table saw to rip all of these to their final length, and then put my favorite handle detail on any cutting board. All the cutting boards in my house, all the cutting boards that I make personally, I don't use a router or some type of template to cut an exact finger hole somewhere. I simply tilt the table saw blade to 30 degrees and cut a chamfer along the bottom edge on the end grain side of all my boards. It is so simple, doesn't leave as much cleanup work like a router bit that burns. And in my opinion, it's the best ergonomical handle. You just grab it wherever you want to grab the board on the ends and you can pick it up. So this is my favorite handle, and I don't see enough people use it in my opinion. So next time you make a cutting board or some type of serving tray, give this idea a shot. You can experiment with how much of the angled face you want exposed. Do you want just a little bit to get your fingers underneath? Do you want the whole edge or the whole side to be on a 30-degree angle? Experiment with that. It's really nice. This is by far my favorite handle setup for any type of cutting board or charcuterie board. One final piece of material to cut up is some teak. My wife is experimenting with buying some pre-made teak panels locally and then having me cut them up into various different sizes for a matching set of cutting board and coasters. So kind of thick for coasters, right? These are about 1 inch thick, but hey, that's fine. She's just experimenting and seeing what sells and all of that. So I'm perfectly okay with getting this done and seeing what happens. I thought about resawing these coasters, but just leave them at 1 inch and be good. Each one of these cutting boards has 6 coasters with it. Back to the router table for some more roundover action, but in this case, not the typical roundover that you'd think of. This is the largest diameter or largest radius roundover bit that I have, and I forget the exact radius, but I put it in the router table so that I can use this push block behind it to eliminate tear out, which worked wonderfully, by the way. And this push block is just a large 8/4 chunk of poplar, square 3 sides to make a nice 90-degree corner. It's still rough sawn on top, which allows this push pad to really grip it. And I can use this as a backer board to push my cutting boards and charcuterie board, well, these cutting boards and what's the other word I'm looking for? Going blank. The coasters through and knock off the corners much faster than using like a corner radius jig and a flush trim bit. This worked out really well, and I think this is going to be my go-to method for any panel that I can safely fit on to the router table rather than using those flush trim corner jigs. Also, it's worth noting that I made sure to do all 4 corners in one direction, flip the board, and then do all 4 corners once again. That way, if the router bit wasn't exactly perfectly set, it'll still be symmetrical. So if the roundover is favoring one side versus the other, flipping it around 180 and doing them all over again will at least make it symmetrical. So that worked out really well. And for these small coasters, this was so fast, way faster than actually using, like I said, one of those corner radius jigs and a flush trim bit. This is definitely a go-to method for me going forward. But wait, there's more radius roundover action. So I'm putting a different radius roundover bit in here. And I think this is, it's not my 1/8 of an inch radius. This is, I think, 3/16 of an inch. It's still a small little radius. And for this, I'm just rounding over the top and bottom edges of all these pieces after that corner radius was cut, which makes it just feel so nice in the hands and flow really well. One thing that I do a little bit differently on the top and bottom roundover is I set the bit just a smidgen too high. That way it does leave this little ridge all the way along the perimeter on top and bottom of the panels. And I do that on purpose because I know that I'm going to sand these later. So if I do a regular radius and it's just it just terminates perfectly with the top and bottom surface, when I start sanding those top and bottom surfaces, I'm actually changing the radius or cutting into the radius a little bit and not having a perfect roundover. So this gives me a little bit of wiggle room to get down to that perfect roundover, and it just ends up being a better product in the end, or a better edge in the end. Edge? I guess you're removing the edge because it's rounded over. It just looks better in the end. This is the final stack, or more appropriately stacks, of various shaped charcuterie boards, cutting boards, serving trays, whatever you want to name it, that's fine, I don't care. Just a fun departure from what I normally do, helping out my wife with just batching out some stuff for her to sell and engrave and all that good stuff. So she will have these for sale on her website, momandmelaser.com. I'm not exactly sure when I'm publishing this or when those are going to be on there, but if you don't see them on there, just send her an email, momandmelaser@gmail.com. Tell her what you're looking for, what you want personalized, and I'm sure she could come up with something. This is her fun little business venture, and I'm just helping out in the background, and we're all just having a lot of fun with it. So that's just what it's about, right? A lot of family fun and cool stuff. Supporting small businesses. Speaking of small businesses, if you want to pick up any one of the router bits that I used in this video, you can go to my friends over at bitsbits.com. Use my promo code, high quality router bits. I would not put my brand next to their brand if they were junk. I'm telling you, these are good quality router bits. You're going to enjoy using them, and really good stuff. So check them out. One more plug for my wife's website, momandmelaser.com. You guys take care. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you in the next video.